Guys, OneMan here. This is a video long overdue, and a video I promised P. Cuthbert I would make a while ago, and I promised it to him. So, let me get right into this discussion without further ado. We as a fandom seem very divided in which Nep games we like and which Nep games we dislike. P. Cuthbert, for example, really detests Hyperdimension Noir and Neptunia U Action Unleashed, and yet seems to be fine with Mega Tag Dimension, which I wholeheartedly disagree with in its entirety. I think that until I'm able... Actually, not... I was originally going to say that I think that until I am able to play the English version of Cyberdimension Neptunia, I find Action Unleashed to be Tamsal's best game, but I'm going to amend that here and now, and I'm still going to stand by my previous statement. I still find Action Unleashed to be Tansau's best game so far. I also find Mega Tag Dimension to be the worst Neptunia game created. The very worst. Whereas I find Hyperdimension Noir to be the third best Neptunia game out of this series, only to be beaten by Super Dimension Neptune vs. Sega Hard Girls and Mega Dimension, of which, by the way, many of you love to rip on Super Dimension as terrible when I find it to be one of the most enjoyable stories out there. Not to mention the gameplay is actually pretty solid. So since people seem to disagree on any Nep game not named Mega Dimension Neptunia V2, what is the core problem? Well, for starters, we must discuss what exactly people do not like about said games I mentioned previously. The biggest gripe against Hyperdimension Noir is not even really the story, but the gameplay mechanics. People bitch and whine about the slow-paced strategy gameplay. However, if you compare Hyperdimension Noir against any other strategy game, Hyperdimension Noir is actually fast-paced in comparison. Therefore, the gripes come from plebeians ignorant of strategy game mechanics. Ironically, no one bitched about the chibi. Their other complaint is esoteric as well, as in that the story is cut and dry and unoriginal, which, newsflash, most Neptunia games struggle with originality in their stories. Yet, no one bitches about Mega Tag Dimension but me. Or at least no one who does discussion videos on Neptunia anyways. Speaking of which, Mega Tag Dimension is a highlight of Tamsal's neglect in their animation and battle mechanics. Not to mention the most outdated and awful online gameplay. If this was done intentionally to comment on old and faulty online gameplay mechanics, well done. Doubt it though. Which is where people bitching about Action U Unleashed really bugs me. Action U Unleashed has one of the best animation production qualities of any Neptunia games. Or at least, as far as spin-offs are concerned at least. Action U constantly impressed me with their animation quality, and not to mention their own gameplay mechanics were far more refined than Mega Tag or Cyberdimension. Whilst the story is bland as fuck for Action U Unleashed, that is the normal trend regardless, so that is not a problem for the Neptunia franchise, let alone the central problem. Nor is it mechanics, because everyone seems to like gameplay mechanics for the majority of the Neptunia games. It most certainly isn't the dress break, that's for damn fucking sure. I mean, seriously. Action U Unleashed dress break mechanic is probably the most inoffensive dress break mechanic I've seen. Trust me, I've seen dress break in Omega Quintet and Senran Kagura. The only bad thing about dress break is the insanely broken offense and defense drop. Action U Unleashed's biggest problem is its lack of spark. The dress break mechanic about Action U Unleashed is entirely unjustified. I mean, after all, both RAM and ROM have the most inoffensive undergarments in the history of mankind. Granny panties. Granny panties all grayed out to prevent any lolicons from slobbering all over them. So really, all gripes against said issues are pointless and a non-issue in of itself. So what is the real central problem? What is the climax to all of my build-up? Simple. The answer is this. Compile Hearts and Idea Factory's reliance upon third-party developers is the very central problem. The issue is that while Compile Heart is a publisher and Idea Factory... Sorry, let me rephrase that. The issue is that Compile Heart is a publisher and that Idea Factory is a distributor. They themselves do not have a development company officially. They rely on outsourced parties to develop games for their own IPs. IPs are short term for intellectual properties. No matter what problems one side or another may have for a game, the inherent root problem is third-party developers. Do you have issues with Hyperdimension OR? Sting is the company you should take issue with. Do you dislike Superdimension Neptune vs. Seiya Hardgrills? Blame Felistella. Are you like me and hate Mega Tagmention? Or you are on the other side of the fence and hate Action U Unleashed? Blame Tamsoft, those degenerate fucks. Or how about the original Neptunia game or the Mark II game? Blame Gust. Did you notice that all of the games that people don't bitch about are led by good third-party developers like Galapagos RPG? Omega Quintet has phenomenal and engaging gameplay mechanics, but slow storytelling narratives. Fairy Fencer F Advent Dark Force has a great balance of good gameplay and a fun story, but relies too heavily on Fang to drive the story forward, which is a stupid idea considering how Fang is as a character. So the story is all over the place and janky sometimes for Fairy Fencer. Not to mention, the evil goddess route is pretty much Satanism, but with replaced pronouns, and even the fandom online calls it the devil route, rather than the evil goddess route. If you don't believe me, check GameFAQs. The Vile God route is intriguing, but suffers several inconsistencies that the Megami route suffers from. However, if you pay attention to who developed Mega Dimension Neptunia V2, you will find that Idea Factory and Compile Heart are the sole developers for the Mega Dimension game, of which you guys ended up seeing the result of when Idea Factory and Compile Heart start to give a shit about their story. So if anything, to solve the problem, you should heavily encourage Compile Heart and Idea Factory being the sole developers of each and every product here on afterwards. I'd rather have less Neptunia games with longer and better gameplay and story mechanics than a constant crankout of mediocre stories and debatable gameplay. They're suffering from weekly anime syndrome, where they think they are better off with more works rather than great works. Which is a problem for another time, but to summarize, it's a bit of an issue of money. Go figure. So yeah, that's the real problem behind the Neptunia franchise and why it struggles with both a casual and recurring audience. Honestly, if I were to give a short summation of why they're making so many crappy ones, and why they should stop making so many, but rather instead make several good quality games, is that if they want to ever attract a new demographic, they really need to work on the quality of their games. If the story content and the gameplay is compelling, then by all means. You don't necessarily need to worry about making more games. You need to be worrying more about expanding the base demographic that likes this series. I mean, could you just imagine if they had put in a little better story padding and quality to Megadimension? And instead of making tons and tons of crappy games, or mediocre games at best, that if they just simply focused on one single continuity and storyline, that they would be better off. I mean, to me, you should be worried about less games being produced and more worried about producing more copies of the said games already out. To me, selling base copies is far better than selling more games to combat, monetary issues. You don't have to make more games to make more money. You can simply draw people further into it better. That's all. That's my take on that. As usual, I ask that you like the video, share on the interwebs, subscribe if you haven't already, click the bell if you haven't already, playlist my OSTs and stream them, and watch my content offline. I'll be re-uploading my previous gameplays into shorter bits and segments for easier viewing pleasure. Well guys, this was a fun project for me to work on. As usual, I'm OneMan. Have a nice day. Never stop loving anime. I'll see you next time.